Coming up on the Delaware Way, Senator Townsend is here to talk about gun control and how will the Trump tariffs affect the Port of Wilmington. This is the Delaware Way. Welcome to the Delaware Way. I'm Larry Menti. In the wake of the shooting in Parkland, Florida, what are Delaware schools doing to keep students safer? What is the state doing to keep the students safer? Senator Bryan Townsend will talk about that and other things. He is representing District 11, which is South Newark.
Correct. Yes, Larry.
Let's talk about the walkout, first of all. I would imagine you support the students doing this?
Yes, I attended the Charter School of Wilmington Cab Callaway joint walkout.
There are many educators that don't think the walkouts are a good idea. And they do it not because they don't believe the students should have a voice. They believe that it's an unnecessary security risk to publicize that students are going to be outside at a certain point. Do you share them in that concern?
No, I certainly respect educators and education professionals and their analyses, but no incidents happened. It was all very, very successful. And I think the reality is that people who are hell-bent on causing danger or harm to students have obviously been going into schools anyway. So I don't think it was a real security risk at all. Everything went very, very well. It would just be nice if every day students could count on that kind of safety. Yeah,
you understand it from their point of view, though. From their point of view,
sure.
They're there. Every day they want to protect the students, and it's a nightmare to have students walking out of a lot of different exits.
I certainly
being outside.
Right, I appreciate them bringing up the point about the importance of doing it in a safe way. But again, I think it can be done in a safe way. It was done in a safe way. No incidents happened, and they're committed to keeping students safe. But sometimes that means public events like any high school sports games. And there are plenty of times where students are out in public. So I don't think this is anything different. Just because it was announced doesn't mean it's any different from any kind of major sporting event, school concert.
So I'll move on, and let's get to the point of the walkout rather than the walkout itself. There have been changes across the country and changes here in Delaware. What are some of the positive steps that have been taken?
So right now, Delaware is advancing, at the state legislative level, advancing several measures with regard to gun safety. We've passed a legislation heading to the governor's desk now that increases the criminal penalties for straw purchases, which is the way in which so many of the guns that are used in crimes are acquired.
That was somebody that can legally get a gun gets one for somebody that can't get a gun.
Yes, or whether it's immediately for that purpose or just eventually, someone who's prohibited from getting a gun just buys it, privately and doesn't go through the required background check channels. There's a bill in the works right now. I believe it'll be passing that it relates to mental health and trying to make sure that if someone poses a danger to themselves or others, there's a way of getting them treatment, but also not having them have access to firearms.
Let's stay with mental health. Is a difficult thing to deal with when it comes to violence, because most people that are mentally ill are not violent.
Correct.
And so is everyone that's mentally ill not allowed to have a gun?
Well, I think, and you're right that there's a concern about stigma and making sure that we're educating people about what we're actually talking about. It's not just because you have a mental illness suddenly you're not able to have a gun. It's if you pose a risk to yourself or others. That's really what was the driving force here. So there can be a variety of mental illnesses that manifest themselves in this kind of way, but there's a whole spectrum of mental illnesses that don't. So this isn't some sort of like catch-all where if you have a mental illness you automatically lose the right to have a firearm. This is much more if there are specific things that are happening. That indicate a possibility of violence. That's where then people dig into it and try to figure out whether you really pose a risk.
And I want to stay with this for a second because certainly Nicholas Cruz was a danger to himself and others. The school knew it, the students knew it, the state knew it, local law enforcement knew it, but they're afraid to act because of dealing with somebody that's mentally ill. There's a Supreme Court law that says exactly what you say. If you're a danger to yourself or others, a ruling, you're allowed to take action as law enforcement, but it is so onerous to be able to get somebody help or to take a gun away from somebody or put somebody away. The law enforcement won't take action.
Sure,
or afraid to.
Yep, or I think in his case as well, I think they interacted with him a few times, and each time they didn't find enough of the evidence that rises to the level of then, a sort of commitment or additional treatment.
So they wait till they commit a crime. That's what they've told people. You have to commit a crime.
Unfortunately, sometimes it rises to that level where and there are other times clearly where someone might be checked in on, and it turns out they are saying things or doing things that rise to a level where treatment, might be required or incarceration, depending on the situation. In the case in Parkland, it sounds like it wasn't. Each time they met with him, I guess it didn't rise to that level. In hindsight, it's tragic, obviously. In hindsight, it looks like there's a gap in the system. Is there a gap in the system? I think that goes to what you're saying.
Which is exactly what I went back to your law about. That's why I brought it up. Because you can pass every law you want to.
Right.
If law enforcement is not going to deal with the mentally ill who are a danger to themselves and others and report them to the schools or put them away, there's really no laws are going to matter.
Whether it's law enforcement or whether it's social services, mental health professionals, schools, it's difficult to do this. I mean, even if you report someone for something they say, do they then do an interview and it turns out they say they were joking and you kind of vet them and it seems like they weren't serious? I mean, it can be very difficult to ensure everyone's safety all the time, right?
So it may not be legislation, it might be education.
Well, it's both, I think. I think that the issue is that we don't have the framework in place to be able to make it clear that there's this reason to be able to confiscate firearms from someone who might pose a risk. I mean, if you get caught up on that part of it, and there's an argument or disagreement about whether that ability for the state even exists, right, then there's a problem. If it's clear that right exists for the state to confiscate firearms for someone who might pose a danger, then you're then to the really important issue as well, is do they pose a danger? So I think you need both. You need a thorough vetting of whether they pose a danger, but you also need a clear framework in place that if they pose a danger, then we're able to confiscate the firearms until they receive the treatment they need.
And I interrupted you. You were going through bump stocks.
Bump stocks passed the Senate, amended, so it's going back to the House, and we'll see if the amendments are changed, or I think eventually it'll reach the governor's desk. We've circulated a bill to ban assault weapons. We circulated it last night. We hope to file it later this week, and I know this will air shortly after that. So we'll see how quickly that moves. The governor had called for that. I think the issue again there is you can't prevent every tragedy. You cannot prevent every tragedy. But the fact that there are extremely lethal firearms available on store shelves mean that when tragedies do occur, there are more fatalities. There's more bodily harm than there would be if the weapons available weren't as lethal.
How about the schools themselves? Are they safe in Delaware?
We haven't had an incident yet in Delaware.
It doesn't mean they're safe.
It doesn't mean they're safe, and it doesn't mean we won't have an incident. So every day, as a legislator, every day you wake up and you hope that you've done everything you can do. There's been a bill over the past few years that's talked about for enhancing school security by either renovating current schools or mandating that future construction schools include different kinds of security features. I know when I go to school, usually the doors are locked from the outside. You have to have staff help you get in, or if the door does open into the front office, it's like right there into the front office. So you hope that we've done everything we can do. There's always discussion of whether or not you can put additional security in schools. There's a discussion nationally, which I don't think has any real traction in Delaware, about arming teachers. You've heard stories over the past couple of weeks of teachers who actually have mishandled firearms in the school. They've discharged and hurting students. I mean, it's a difficult issue. So that's why I don't think ultimately the solution is in making every single school a lockdown prison type scenario. You want certain features, yes. You want to have people have identification and badges and visitors sign in. You want all of that. But we also need to do a much better job with mental health treatment, because that's where these school shootings, I think, are really happening. These aren't sort of run-of-the-mill criminals. These are people who are disturbed.
And sometimes they're crying out for help.
Crying out for help. They see the news reports, and you have copycat instances. I mean, we sort of as a society don't quite have the cohesion and the community connections that I think can keep a lot of these situations in a better place, where you don't have people crying out for help.
I want to move on to other topics. We'll do that when we come back in the next segment, including getting insurance for people that have fertility problems and also reducing the student loan debt for educators, when we continue our conversation with Senator Bryan Townsend from District 11, which is in South Newark, when the Delaware Way continues.